we're definitely going into the thick of it. Into the thick of it. What is up, pioneers? So even though it is no longer mental health month, I still think it's important to talk about mental health stuff, right? That's the whole point of Pioneer Faith. We're bridging that whole Christianity, mental health shebang bang. And today I'm talking to you guys about a concept called hypervigilance. So hypervigilance is a response to trauma, and I feel like a lot of us, especially Black people, don't really recognize or understand when we're doing it. And so it becomes like we have this regular vigilance of where, we're taking in our surroundings to make sure that we're safe on a very base, positive level, right? But hypervigilance is when you're now like scoping the heck out of surroundings, looking at people's minute details in their faces, in their body languages, things like that, to actually understand your environment to the point where you can predict things. Because in your mind, if you can predict things, then you're safe. I feel like for me, growing up in environments where like people's moods shifted very often, I felt like I needed to be hyper vigilant to understand. Plus, like I've stated before, having lost my dad, I feel like caused me to be hyper vigilant in just trying to really think all of the possible scenarios that I could think, so I wouldn't feel so out of sorts, out of pocket with the reality that I had to live without a parent on the face of this world, like as soon as I did, right? So hypervigilance makes you extremely tired because you are on like 1,000, 24/7. Can't tell you the amount of times. It's just no rest for the weary, swear. But I will say, for me personally, I think that my hypervigilance does give me some comfort, because at least it's like I feel like I can very much understand a lot of what people have going on. Like I can understand like different shifts in tones, but I know that it can be harmful because when you're hypervigilant, you can sometimes make assumptions about, oh, well, because this person's tone is this is what this means, when that could not even be the case. And so I challenge you that if you do have, you're like, oh wow, this video sounds like this is something that I go through and deal with, then I challenge you to move beyond the assumptions that you make about people just because you're like, well, I've been reading them for this long and I know this, and this. People can still change up things and not be as predictable as we want them to be, which infuriates me to no end and degree. I promise it does. But it's fine, whatever. Living with hypervigilance, other than the tired thing, I feel like sometimes it makes it hard for me to connect to other people, because in order for me to feel like safe with you, I feel like my hypervigilance has to actually work to where I understand the small nuances on your face, your body language, stuff like that. So if I feel like I'm not there, I don't feel like I'm safe with you. And so that could be like if I'm not safe with you, then I'm not going to be vulnerable with you, let my guard down with you, be emotionally available to the degree that you would think I would be. But I'm going to make you think that I am, because that's part of the safety, is being like, oh, you're going to think you know a lot about me and that you know me really well, but you don't actually, because it's a safety mechanism. It's so great. I would also like to recommend that if you feel like this is something that resonates with you, definitely do some research if you can and have the capability. Talk to a mental health professional about it, and understand too that it is also associated with PTSD, and PTSD is not just associated with people in the military. I feel like a lot of people think like, oh, I haven't been to war, so I have never experienced PTSD. That is not the case. Trauma is post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's like trauma can literally be the simplest thing of like watching somebody get hit with a car on the street. Like that's traumatic if you don't feel like you have the emotional capacity to handle watching that. Or all of the cop brutality videos that we've had to be subjected to in the media, things like that, people being attacked during protests and things like, there's just so many things that can count as trauma, and it's so individualized too. So it's just like, just because your trauma doesn't look like anybody else's trauma doesn't mean that it's not trauma. People might try to take that away from you and be like, oh, well, you didn't go through something that's that bad. But if that was that bad to your nervous system, your automatic system, then it was that bad to you. And there's no shame in that, because we all have different sorts of thresholds and levels that we can handle things. And some people, it's just that low, and that's okay. Like, I mean, we're all different, right? Like, we're all different. But hypervigilance, yeah. I don't really know how to connect it to God in specificity. I don't feel like, I feel like some people think like, oh, well, God allowed this to happen, or God put me in this situation. But I feel like for me personally that God is a God that lets you deal with your own stuff and the consequences of the choices that you make. And so sometimes that means that you're also dealing with the consequences of other people's choices, which isn't as fair. But at the same time too, imagine if God had to step in for every little consequence that everybody on the face of this planet had to deal with. He would really never get any rest. Like, that just sounds exhausting, A, but also B, nobody would learn anything. Nobody would grow. Nobody would evolve, because God's always stepping in and saving us. And I personally, I don't know if I like respect God as much if he was just like, nope, I'm gonna shield you from this, stop this from happening. Oh no, we can't let you break a fingernail. Like, what life is supposed to happen? Like, quite literally, you have a choice, you have action, you have consequence. Like, that's just saying, that's life. I will say, like, sometimes when I feel like it's getting unmanageable or uncontrollable for me, I will kind of like seek God out more and just be like, yo, Big G, like, I'm tired. Like, I pray that you can, relax my mind, give me some rest, and also understand too that part of that is also still my responsibility in my hypervigilance. So again, like, reminding myself, like, okay, that could be what their body language is saying, but realize that it could also be something different. So if I really feel that uneasy about it, just ask. Just be like, this is what your body looks like it's saying? So is it actually saying that? I will say the best thing to combat hypervigilance will be like that healthy communication, getting that dialogue from outside of your head out into the open and simply just asking people. And I know they might be like, oh, well, no, or, there's so many different reactions that could be had. But I think as a whole, as a society, we've got to be better at communicating in a more healthy fashion and just being like, this is what it is, or this is what it's not. Yes, you read that right, this is what this is. You're like, no, like, I'm just upset about a different situation and this is what's going on for me. Cool. Just let people know. But we do a lot of like in our head stuff. I'm obviously speaking for myself, since I feel like 90% of my life is just in my cranium. And it's just like, okay, that's great, but you still need that other 50% from the other person. You cannot make up everything by yourself. I think the last thing I want to say is that, like, hypervigilance doesn't make you weak or defective or broken. I feel like, when it comes to anything that you're like, oh my gosh, you have this revelation for, we have a tendency to kind of invalidate ourselves and just be like, oh, well, this means that I must be broken or defective, or it's just the way that you cope to deal with your circumstances. And I mean, is it a positive coping skill? Probably not, but I mean, there are always ways that we can change negative coping skills into positive coping skills. And also, how you cope is how you cope to get through what you're trying to get through. And as long as you are coping to get through it and you're not like, okay, forget this, I'm out, I feel like we can learn to adjust and refigure it out. But never like put blame on yourself or be hard on yourself for the way that you had to adapt to survive. Because we're all just adapting to survive out here, to figure out how to cope with what's happening in our own lives, in the larger society, and everything like that. So just please be kind to yourself. Please be gentle with yourself. Please love yourself. I'm saying this to myself so you know that you're not alone. I struggle with these things as well, but I know that we are stronger and we can overcome, because we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Period. That's not who I want to be. But we're here. As always, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Anything that I said, go ahead and put it in the comments. You're like, yeah, girl, I feel you. You're like, nah, girl, I don't. I want to hear it all. I want the feedback, I want the dialogue and the interaction. And I'll see you guys next Monday.